She helped an old man every day. She did not expect him to actually be the Mafia king. It all starts when a quiet cafe worker helps a sweet, shaky old man cross the street after work. But one night, a black van stops beside her, masked men jump out, and someone growls, "Where's the king?" She thinks they're crazy, until a dangerous man drags her into a getaway car and tells her the truth. The old man she helped, he's the most feared crime boss in the city, and now she is the last person he trusted before he vanished. Suddenly, every gang in town wants her. She's locked inside a luxury safe house with a man who kills without blinking and swears he's the only thing keeping her alive. But if the Mafia king trusted her, what did he give her? What secret is she carrying without even knowing? And can she survive becoming the one woman the entire criminal underworld is hunting? Or is she already too deep to ever escape? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The evening sun cast long shadows across the busy city streets as Lila Hart untied her coffee-stained apron, her fingers still warm from hours of serving hot drinks. She pushed through the cafe's heavy glass door, the familiar bell chiming overhead as she stepped into the cooling autumn air. Her legs ached from the long shift, but a small smile tugged at her lips. Mr. Sal would be waiting. The intersection ahead buzzed with the usual rush-hour energy. Car horns blared, and yellow taxis wove between lanes while pedestrians huddled at the corners, their coats pulled tight against the breeze. Through the chaos, Lila spotted him, the elderly gentleman who had become such a constant fixture in her daily routine. Mr. Sal stood at his usual spot, leaning slightly on his cane. His silver hair caught the fading sunlight, and his weathered face brightened at her approach. Something about his dignified presence always made her want to straighten her posture, even after hours on her feet. "Good evening, Mr. Sal," Lila said warmly, tucking her apron into her messenger bag. "How are you today?" "Ah, my dear girl." His eyes crinkled with genuine affection. "Better now that you're here. These old bones aren't what they used to be." Lila gently took his arm, feeling the familiar wool of his coat beneath her fingers. "The crosswalk can be tricky at this time of day, shall we?" They waited for the signal, and Lila filled the moment with light chatter about her day, a spilled latte, a kind customer's generous tip, the new seasonal drinks on the menu. Mr. Sal listened with his usual patient attention, nodding and chuckling at all the right moments. "The pumpkin spice is back," she told him as they carefully navigated the crosswalk. "Though I still think your traditional espresso order is the best choice." "Some things are better left unchanged," he agreed, his cane tapping steadily against the pavement. They reached the bus stop, its metal bench gleaming dully under the streetlights that had begun to flicker on. As always, Mr. Sal patted her hand and assured her he could manage the rest of his journey alone. "You're a good girl, Lila," he said, his voice carrying its usual warmth. "Get home safe now." She watched him settle onto the bench before turning toward her own route home, her shoes clicking against the concrete. The street ahead narrowed into one of the older neighborhoods, where historic buildings crowded close together and cast deep shadows between them. The sound came first, tires screeching against asphalt, rubber burning with desperate speed. Lila's head snapped up just as the black van appeared, its side door already sliding open with a metallic growl. Her heart leaped into her throat, but before she could run, rough hands seized her arms. "Where's the king?" a harsh voice demanded. The man's face was hidden behind a black mask, only his eyes visible, cold and sharp as steel. I don't know what you're talking about." Lila struggled against their grip, her bag falling to the ground. "Please, I don't know anything." Another masked figure rifled through her scattered belongings, movements quick and practiced. He pulled out something that made her blood run cold. Photographs. In the harsh streetlight, she could see herself with Mr. Sal, image after image capturing their daily meetings. "Don't play dumb," the first man snarled, pressing her against the van's cold metal surface. The blade in his hand caught the light, its edge promising violence. "We know you're his contact. Tell us where he is." Lila's mind raced, fear closing her throat. Who was Mr. Sal, really? What had she unknowingly become part of? The knife edged closer to her throat, and tears burned in her eyes. The first shot cracked through the air like thunder. The alley erupted into chaos. More gunfire followed, sharp and precise. Through her terror, Lila saw one of her captors fall, then another. The man holding the knife spun around, blade raised, but he never completed the turn. A tall figure materialized from the shadows like an avenging angel. He moved with lethal grace, each action precise and devastating. His dark coat swirled around him as he dispatched the masked men with brutal efficiency. Lila caught glimpses of his face in the chaos, sharp features set in grim determination, eyes that burned with controlled fury. The last kidnapper fled into the darkness, leaving his fallen companions behind. Before Lila could process what had happened, the stranger, her rescuer, closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. His hand wrapped around her wrist, grip firm but not cruel. "Come with me," he commanded, his voice deep and brooking no argument. "Now." Lila found herself pulled toward a sleek black sedan that had appeared at the alley's entrance, its armored bulk gleaming ominously. The man, Dominic Moretti, though she didn't yet know his name, yanked open the back door and guided her inside with surprising gentleness despite his urgent movements. The door slammed behind her with heavy finality, and the car accelerated smoothly into the night traffic. Lila's heart pounded against her ribs as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. The leather seats were soft beneath her trembling hands, and the interior smelled of expensive cologne and something metallic she didn't want to identify. Streetlights strobed across the tinted windows as they wound through the city. Lila glanced at her rescuer, who had slid into the seat beside her. Up close, she could see the perfect cut of his suit beneath the coat, the way his hands, capable of such violence moments ago, now rested calmly on his thighs. The silence in the car felt heavy, charged with unasked questions and unspoken threats. Lila's work apron suddenly seemed absurdly out of place in this world of violence and luxury she'd been thrust into. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop shaking. "Those men," she finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were asking about Mr. Sal, called him the king. Who is he really?" Dominic's eyes met hers in the dim light, dark and unreadable. "Someone very important," he said after a long moment. "Someone a lot of people want to find." "And you?" Lila asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Who are you?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Someone who's going to keep you alive." The car continued its journey through the city, leaving behind the familiar streets Lila knew. Each turn took her further from her simple life of serving coffee and helping elderly men cross the street. She watched her old world slip away through the tinted glass, knowing somehow that she could never go back to it. The city lights blurred together as they picked up speed, and Lila found herself stealing glances at the mysterious man beside her. His profile was sharp against the passing lights. Jaw clenched with tension she could feel radiating off him. Despite the violence she'd witnessed, she didn't feel afraid of him. Something in the way he'd positioned himself between her and the door spoke of protection rather than imprisonment. "Where are we going?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded in the luxurious interior. "Somewhere safe," Dominic replied, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings through the windows. "Those men will come back. They won't stop until they find what they're looking for." "And what exactly are they looking for?" Lila pressed, gathering her courage. "What have I been involved in without knowing it?" Dominic turned to look at her fully then, his gaze intense enough to make her breath catch. "A war," he said simply. "One that just became your concern, whether you wanted it or not." The armored sedan sliced through the night-darkened streets, its engine a low purr that did nothing to calm Lila's racing heart. She sat rigid on the leather seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap, still wearing her coffee-stained apron from the cafe. Beside her, Dominic Moretti radiated cold fury, his jaw clenched as he stared straight ahead. "What did you tell them?" he demanded suddenly, his voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "What information did you give away about Salvatore Moretti?" Lila's confusion only deepened at the unfamiliar name. I don't know who that is," she stammered. "Those men were asking about Mr. Sal, but I didn't tell them anything. I honestly don't know what they wanted." "Mr. Sal?" Dominic's laugh was harsh and without humor. "Is that what you call him? The man you've been meeting at that intersection?" "He's just an elderly gentleman I help across the street," Lila insisted, her voice trembling. "He takes the bus home." "Impossible," Dominic cut her off, his tone dismissive. "You're the last uncontaminated link, the only civilian connection he maintained." His dark eyes studied her face intently. "And now he's gone missing." The car descended into an underground parking garage, the entrance concealed behind what appeared to be a maintenance door in an upscale building. Security cameras tracked their movement as they wound deeper beneath the street, the space growing increasingly narrow until they reached a private section cordoned off by heavy steel barriers. When the car finally stopped, Dominic emerged first, scanning the area before opening Lila's door. his hand wrapped around her upper arm, firm but not painful, as he guided her toward a private elevator. The doors opened immediately at his approach, revealing a luxuriously appointed interior with no buttons, just a sleek panel that responded to his fingerprint. They rode in tense silence, climbing what felt like dozens of floors before emerging into a hallway with only one door. The security measures here were even more impressive: cameras, reinforced walls, and another biometric scanner that Dominic pressed his palm against. The apartment beyond was stunning, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furnishings in muted grays and blacks. But Lila barely had time to take it in before Dominic steered her to a chair in what appeared to be a living room. "Sit," he commanded, and she sank into the leather seat, feeling small and out of place in her work clothes. Dominic remained standing, his imposing figure blocking her view of the city lights beyond the windows. "The man you know as Mr. Sal is Salvatore Moretti," he said, watching her face carefully. "He's not some helpless old man who needs assistance crossing the street. He's the king, the head of the Moretti crime family, and as of 12 hours ago, he's disappeared." Lila felt the blood drain from her face. That's not possible," she whispered. "He's just a sweet old man who happened to appear at the same intersection at the same time several days a week," Dominic interrupted. "Who always declined further help beyond that one block. Who never seemed to actually need the bus." Each question hit Lila like a physical blow as the implications sank in. She thought of Mr. Sal's gentle smile, his warm thanks, the way he'd ask about her day while she guided him across the street. "I need to know everything," Dominic continued, his voice hard. "Every conversation, every detail, every interaction you've ever had with him. Leave nothing out." Lila took a shaky breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "I first met him about 4 months ago. He was standing at the intersection after my evening shift, looking uncertain about crossing. I offered to help, and he was so grateful." She swallowed hard. "After that, it became a routine. He'd be there 3 or 4 times a week, always around 9:30 in the evening." "What did you talk about?" "Just normal things. How my day went at the cafe, the weather. Sometimes he'd tell stories about his grandchildren or ask about my family." Lila's voice grew softer. "He seemed so frail sometimes. The way his hands would shake when he held my arm." Dominic's expression tightened. "All an act," he said flatly. The tremors, the uncertainty, the apparent weakness. It was a carefully crafted persona, a way to observe people's true character while remaining invisible to his enemies. "But why?" Lila asked, her mind struggling to reconcile the gentle elder she knew with this new reality. "Because a king needs to know his kingdom," Dominic replied. "And sometimes the view from the throne is too distant to see the truth. Salvatore has always believed in knowing his territory intimately. Not just the criminal elements, but the ordinary people too. Their nature, their hearts." His eyes fixed on her intently. "You became the only civilian he maintained regular contact with? The only one he seemed to trust?" Lila shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't understand. Why me?" "That's what I need to figure out," Dominic said. "Because right now, you're our only lead to finding him alive." He began to pace, his movements controlled but radiating tension. "Did he ever mention specific places? Names? Did anything about his behavior change recently?" Lila closed her eyes, trying to remember. He talked about a garden sometimes, roses he was proud of. And there was a cafe he mentioned loving as a young man, but it closed years ago. She opened her eyes to find Dominic watching her intently. "Last week, he seemed preoccupied, less talkative than usual, but he still smiled and thanked me, just like always." "The timing fits," Dominic muttered, more to himself than to her. He must have known something was coming. He turned back to Lila, his expression grave. "You need to understand your position here. Those men who tried to take you, they're just the beginning. Every criminal organization in the city will be looking for you now, hoping you can lead them to Salvatore." Fear crept up Lila's spine as the reality of her situation became clear. "What happens to me?" "You stay here," Dominic stated firmly, "under my protection. This is one of our most secure locations. No one gets in or out without my authorization." His voice left no room for argument. "You will not leave until we find Salvatore alive." Lila looked around the luxurious prison she now found herself in, her work apron suddenly feeling like a relic from another life. Through the windows, she could see the city sprawling below, lights twinkling like stars. Somewhere out there, the kind old man she'd helped across the street, the secret king of a criminal empire, was missing, and she was now caught in the center of a dangerous game she never knew existed. "How long?" she asked quietly. Dominic's expression remained impassive. "As long as it takes." He moved toward what appeared to be a security panel near the entrance. "Elena will bring you some clothes and necessities. In the meantime, try to remember anything else about your interactions with Salvatore. Any detail could be important." Lila watched him check the security systems, his movements precise and practiced. The man who had saved her in the alley, who now held her captive for her own protection, was as much a mystery as the gentle elder who had turned out to be a Mafia king. She wondered what other secrets lurked beneath the surface of this new world she'd been thrust into. The city lights continued to twinkle beyond the windows, but they no longer seemed welcoming. Instead, they reminded her of the surveillance photos the masked men had shown her, proof that her simple life had been anything but for longer than she'd realized. The weight of unwanted importance settled onto her shoulders as she sat in the pristine apartment, waiting for whatever would come next. Lila barely slept in the unfamiliar bedroom, tossing and turning as her mind raced through the day's events. The soft footsteps of armed guards outside her door served as a constant reminder of her new reality. Every creak and whisper in the dark made her heart race, memories of masked men and gunfire flashing behind her closed eyes. When morning light finally crept through the windows, she found fresh clothes laid out, expensive items that fit perfectly, making her wonder how they knew her size. After changing, she hesitated at the bedroom door, her hand hovering over the handle. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the hallway. The guards nodded silently as she passed, their weapons visible beneath tailored jackets. In the living room, Dominic stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his phone pressed to his ear. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. "I don't care what it takes," he growled into the phone, his voice low and dangerous. "Find everyone involved in that ambush. Make them understand the consequences of touching what belongs to the Moretti family." He paused, listening. "No survivors. Send the message." Lila froze, her blood running cold at his words. This was the other side of her rescuer, the Mafia prince ordering deaths with the same ease someone else might order coffee. Dominic's eyes locked onto her, and he ended the call without another word. "Sit down," he commanded, gesturing to the leather sofa. "We need to talk more about Salvatore." Leela sank into the cushions, wrapping her arms around herself. "I've told you everything." "No!" He stalked closer, looming over her. "There has to be more. Think harder. Did he ever mention specific times he'd be somewhere? Places he liked to visit? People he talked about?" "Just normal things," she said, her voice small. "The weather, his garden, sometimes stories about when he was younger." "Details," Dominic pressed, running a hand through his dark hair in frustration. "Every single detail matters." "He liked to talk about his roses," Lila offered. "He said the white ones were blooming early this year. He mentioned a cafe he used to visit in his youth, but it closed decades ago. Sometimes he'd tell stories about his family, but never any names." Dominic paced, his movements tightly controlled. "What else? Think about his routines, his habits." "He always insisted on taking the bus home himself," she said. "Even when it was raining, he'd refuse my offer to call him a taxi." A muscle twitched in Dominic's jaw. Because he had men following the bus, protecting him, he maintained the illusion of independence while keeping his security in place. Hours passed as Dominic questioned her repeatedly, approaching the same topics from different angles, searching for anything she might have forgotten. He ordered lunch delivered, but barely touched his food, watching her eat with an intensity that made her nervous. "You can't keep me here forever," she said finally, setting down her fork. "I can, and I will," he replied without hesitation. "Those men had your photograph. They've been watching you, studying your movements. The moment you step outside, you're dead." The brutal honesty in his voice made her shiver. "My job, my apartment. None of that matters anymore." His expression softened fractionally. "I know this is difficult to accept, but your old life ended the moment they targeted you." Throughout the afternoon, Dominic refused to let her out of his sight. When she moved to the window, he tensed. When she walked to the kitchen for water, his eyes tracked her movements. He was like a predator, coiled and ready to strike at any threat, yet somehow his presence made her feel safer rather than more afraid. As evening approached, Lila had settled into an uneasy silence, curled in an armchair with a book she couldn't focus on. Dominic worked at a laptop nearby, his fingers flying over the keys as he coordinated his search for Salvatore. A quiet beep cut through the silence. Dominic's head snapped up, his expression darkening as he reached for his phone. Lila watched his face transform from concern to cold fury as he stared at the screen. "What is it?" she asked, her heart beginning to race. Without speaking, he turned the phone toward her. The image was grainy but clear enough. She recognized herself and Salvatore from the previous evening walking down the street together. Her stomach dropped as she read the caption beneath. "Bring us the girl or the king dies." Dominic's movements were swift and precise as he activated additional security measures throughout the safe house. Metal shutters slid silently over the windows. Locks engaged with heavy clicks. The entire apartment transformed into an impenetrable fortress within seconds. When he turned back to her, his eyes were hard as steel. "You're not going home again?" "Ever?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "They've shown their hand," he said. "They think you're valuable enough to trade for Salvatore. That makes you both an asset and a target." He moved closer, his presence overwhelming. "I won't let them use you to get to him. You're under my protection now, permanently." Lila sank deeper into the chair, reality crashing down around her. "What about my life? My friends, my family?" "We'll handle it," Dominic said. "Make it look like you took an unexpected job opportunity overseas, moved away suddenly for a fresh start." His voice softened slightly. "It's the only way to keep them safe, too. As long as no one knows where you are, they can't be used against you." The city lights beyond the windows disappeared completely as the final security measures engaged. Lila stared at the metal shutters, feeling the walls of her world closing in. The kind old man she'd helped across the street had pulled her into a dangerous game of power and survival. And now there was no way out. Dominic moved to stand by her chair, his presence both threatening and reassuring. "I know this isn't what you wanted," he said quietly, "but I will keep you alive, whatever it takes." The promise in his voice sent shivers down her spine, not entirely from fear. Even as her world crumbled around her, something in his fierce protectiveness made her feel anchored, safe, despite everything being so terribly wrong. Hours ticked by as night fell completely. The safe house hummed with electronic security and the whispered movements of guards. Leela remained curled in her chair, watching Dominic work tirelessly at his laptop, coordinating teams searching for Salvatore while simultaneously arranging the disappearance of her old life. The gentle normalcy of yesterday, serving coffee, helping an elderly man cross the street walking home alone, seemed like a distant dream. Now she sat in a fortified cage with a dangerous man who killed without hesitation, yet seemed determined to protect her at any cost. The contrast made her head spin. Dominic's phone buzzed again, and he answered it immediately. "Report," he commanded. Lila watched his expression darken as he listened. "Double the patrols. No one gets within 3 blocks without being identified." He ended the call and glanced at her. "Try to rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." But rest seemed impossible as Lila sat in the secured living room, watching Dominic work with single-minded focus. Her world had narrowed to these rooms, this man, and the invisible threads connecting her to a missing Mafia king. Whatever came next would change everything. She just didn't know if she was ready for what that meant. Lila tossed and turned in the safe house's guest room, the silk sheets feeling foreign against her skin. Every creak and footstep from the guards outside her door made her flinch. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked 3 o'clock in the morning when she heard Dominic's low voice filtering through the walls, speaking urgently into his phone. "No signs of forced entry. Check the warehouse district again. I want every camera feed from the past 72 hours. His voice faded as he moved down the hallway, but his presence lingered like a shadow. Sleep came in brief, fitful moments. When dawn finally painted the reinforced windows with pale light, Lila's eyes burned with exhaustion. A knock at her door made her sit up straight, heart racing until Dominic's voice came through. "Breakfast." He entered carrying a tray loaded with fresh fruit, pastries, and coffee. The domestic gesture seemed at odds with the gun holstered at his hip. "Eat," he commanded, setting the tray beside her. "We need to talk." Lila wrapped her hands around the warm coffee mug, seeking comfort in its familiar scent. "What's happening?" Dominic's jaw tightened. "The rival syndicate is escalating. They're convinced Salvatore gave you something valuable." His dark eyes studied her face. "Did he ever hand you anything? A letter, a key, even something that seemed insignificant?" No, Nothing. Lila shook her head. We just talked about normal things. The weather, books I was reading, his grandchildren. His what? Dominic's voice sharpened. He mentioned having grandchildren in passing, Lila said. Was that not true? Salvatore never had children besides me, and I'm adopted. Dominic ran a hand through his dark hair. He was feeding you false information, probably to protect both of you if anyone was listening. Without warning, Dominic moved to her overnight bag, which the guards had retrieved from her apartment. He emptied it methodically onto the bed. Her cafe uniform, wallet, phone, a worn paperback novel, and basic toiletries. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that could be considered valuable to a criminal syndicate. His movements became less aggressive as he examined each item, clearly realizing she was telling the truth. When he reached her book, a dog-eared romance novel, his expression softened slightly. You really are just what you appear to be, aren't you? Lila nodded, throat tight. I'm sorry I can't help more. Dominic returned her belongings to the bag, his actions gentler now. Don't apologize. You're a civilian caught in a war you never asked for. He paused, considering her. But we need to move. The safe house has been compromised. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Guards swept the hallways while Dominic explained they were relocating to a secure penthouse. Lila changed into fresh clothes they'd acquired for her, simple but expensive items that felt strange against her skin. Stay close to me, Dominic instructed as they prepared to leave. Don't speak to anyone. Don't make eye contact with anyone. If something happens, do exactly as I say, without hesitation. The journey to the penthouse, though only across town, felt like navigating a minefield. Armed men flanked them in the elevator and through the parking garage. Dominic kept one hand on the small of her back, guiding her while simultaneously scanning for threats. When a car backfired nearby, he instantly pressed her against the wall, shielding her with his body until he confirmed there was no danger. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a luxury building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered spectacular views of the city, but Lila noticed the glass was bulletproof, the doors reinforced with steel. Beautiful and deadly, like everything in Dominic's world. Hours passed in tense silence. Dominic worked continuously, coordinating search efforts and security measures, while Lila tried to process her new reality. The sun began to set, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Finally, Dominic approached where she sat, curled in a window seat. I don't think you betrayed anyone, he said quietly. But someone wants you dead to weaken me. Lila looked up at him, confused. Why would hurting me weaken you? You barely know me. Because Salvatore chose you. Dominic's voice was heavy with meaning. He spent months watching you, testing your character, building trust. He's never done that with anyone outside the family. By targeting you, they're trying to prove they can reach anyone we care about. The weight of his words settled over her as she prepared for bed that evening. The guest room in the penthouse was larger than her entire apartment, but she felt more trapped than ever. Sitting on the edge of the plush mattress, she jumped slightly when Dominic appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment, his powerful frame filling the space. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. From this point forward, your life is tied to mine. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and threat. Lila understood she was no longer just a witness or a potential lead. She had become something more complex, a weakness perhaps, but also a responsibility Dominic would defend with lethal force. Exhaustion pulled at her muscles as she tried to process everything. The guards took up their positions outside her door, and Dominic's footsteps retreated down the hallway. Through the bulletproof windows, the city sparkled deceptively peaceful, while inside, Lila lay awake wondering how helping an old man cross the street had led her into this dangerous new world. She could hear Dominic moving through the penthouse, his quiet efficiency somehow reassuring despite everything. His earlier words echoed in her mind. Her life was now tied to his. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, it carried an odd comfort. In less than 48 hours, her entire world had shifted on its axis, leaving Dominic as her only constant, dangerous and protective, threatening and safe. The night stretched on, filled with the soft sounds of security systems and guard rotations. Somewhere in the city, Salvatore was being held against his will. Somewhere masked men were planning their next move. And here, in this fortified tower, Lila lay suspended between her old life and whatever dangerous future awaited her, with only Dominic Moretti standing between her and those who wished her harm. The digital clock beside her bed blinked midnight, its red numbers a reminder that another day had passed in this strange new reality. Tomorrow would bring new threats, new revelations, new moments of tension and protection. But for now, Lila closed her eyes, letting exhaustion finally overcome her racing thoughts, knowing that beyond her door, Dominic kept his vigilant watch. Sunlight filtered through the bulletproof glass as Lila woke in unfamiliar luxury. The penthouse was silent except for the muffled sound of Dominic's voice from the living room. She found him fully dressed in a tailored black suit, a shoulder holster visible beneath his jacket as he paced, barking orders into his phone. "I don't care what it takes, find him!" His voice carried the edge of controlled fury. "Check every warehouse in the industrial district again." He ended the call when he noticed her, his expression hardening. "You should eat something." The kitchen was stocked with fresh groceries she hadn't seen arrive. As she made coffee, 2 guards swept through on their rotation, their weapons visible at their hips. Lila's hand shook slightly as she poured her cup, the normality of breakfast feeling surreal against the backdrop of danger. Dominic worked through the morning, coordinating teams, searching for Salvatore while monitoring security feeds. He moved with predatory grace, every gesture precise and controlled. Lila watched him from the corner of her eye, noting how his power seemed to fill the space, how others instinctively yielded to his authority. By afternoon, the confinement began to suffocate her. The penthouse, despite its size and luxury, felt like a cage. Lila approached the balcony doors, desperate for fresh air, but Dominic's voice stopped her before she could reach for the handle. "Step away from the doors!" His tone left no room for argument. "I just need some air," she protested, reaching for the handle anyway. In 2 long strides, he was beside her, his hand closing over hers. "Your silhouette would make an easy target. 1 shot is all they need." "So I'm just supposed to stay locked away forever?" Lila pulled her hand free, anger finally breaking through her fear. "I'm not your prisoner." "No," he growled, stepping closer. "You're my responsibility, and I won't let you die because you're too stubborn to understand the danger." They stood too close, the air between them charged with tension and something else, something that made Lila's breath catch. Dominic's eyes darkened as they dropped to her lips, then snapped away as he stepped back, jaw tight. The afternoon stretched into evening, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words. Lila tried to distract herself with a book while Dominic conducted business in his office. When she went to the kitchen for water, she heard a sharp intake of breath from the adjacent room. She found Dominic in the study, attempting to treat a knife wound on his side. His shirt was unbuttoned, revealing tanned skin marred by both old scars and fresh injury. He stiffened when he saw her. "Get out!" Instead, Lila approached slowly. "Let me help. I don't need, please." She kept her voice soft, already reaching for the first aid kit on his desk. After a long moment, he gave a curt nod. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she cleaned the wound, trying not to notice how his muscles tensed under her touch or how his breathing changed when her fingers brushed his skin. The cut wasn't deep, but it told a story of violence she hadn't witnessed. "What happened?" she asked quietly, applying antiseptic. "Someone who won't be a problem anymore." His voice was low, controlled, but something in his expression shifted as he watched her careful movements. The gentleness of her touch seemed to unsettle him more than the injury itself. When she finished bandaging the wound, her hand lingered for a moment on his skin. Dominic caught her wrist, his grip firm, but not painful. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the penthouse completely. In one fluid motion, Dominic pulled Lila against his chest and moved them behind a marble pillar. She heard the crash of breaking glass, the swift movement of multiple bodies entering the space. "Don't make a sound," he breathed against her ear, his arm like steel around her waist. The first intruder died silently, a quick, efficient movement from Dominic that Lila felt more than saw. The second came closer, and this time she couldn't look away. Dominic's movements were lethal poetry, without hesitation or mercy. 2 bodies hit the floor before the backup lights flickered on, casting the scene in harsh relief. Blood stained the imported marble. Dominic stood between Lila and the dead men, his weapon still drawn, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. In the distance, police sirens wailed closer as his security team secured the penthouse. When he turned to her, his eyes were dark with fury and something fiercer: possession, protection, need. Blood flecked his hands as he reached for her face, checking for injuries. "They came for you," he said fiercely, his touch belying the harshness of his voice. Lila stood frozen, her world narrowed to the feel of his hands on her skin and the evidence of what he would do to keep her safe. The sirens grew louder, but Dominic's focus remained entirely on her, as if memorizing her features to assure himself she was unharmed. His security team moved efficiently around them, cleaning up evidence before the police arrived. Dominic didn't step away from her, maintaining physical contact as if afraid she'd disappear. The violence of moments ago contrasted sharply with the gentleness of his touch now, creating a dichotomy that made Lila's head spin. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her face. She shook her head, unable to form words. The reality of what she'd witnessed, what he'd done to protect her, was still sinking in. These men had died because of her, because someone wanted to use her to get to Salvatore, to Dominic. "Look at me," he commanded softly, tilting her chin up. "This is my world, Lila. This is what I am. Do you understand?" She did understand, finally. She understood that Dominic Moretti was both her greatest danger and her only safety, that his violence was a shield around her now, and that the gentleness he showed only to her was as much a part of him as his lethal skill. The police siren stopped outside the building. Dominic's men would handle them, explaining away the disturbance with practiced ease. But Dominic didn't move, keeping Lila close as the chaos swirled around them, his body still angled protectively between her and any potential threat. In the harsh emergency lighting, his face was all shadows and sharp angles, beautiful and terrible. Blood stained his shirt where he'd torn his stitches. But he seemed oblivious to the pain, focused entirely on maintaining his protective hold on her. The night stretched ahead, full of police statements and security sweeps, but for now they remained suspended in this moment, his hands still cradling her face, her fingers clutched in his shirt, both of them breathing hard from adrenaline and proximity. The dead men lay forgotten on the floor, a stark reminder of the price of survival in Dominic's world. The city lights blurred past the armored cars' windows as they sped through the pre-dawn streets. Lila pulled her coat tighter around herself, her hands still trembling from the events at the penthouse. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dominic's lethal grace, the way he'd moved like a shadow to protect her. The memory of bodies hitting marble made her shiver. Beside her, Dominic methodically checked his weapons, the metallic clicks punctuating the silence. His eyes never stopped, scanning the mirrors, watching for threats in the darkness. The weight of his protection felt both suffocating and necessary now. 2 minutes, he said quietly, holstering his gun. "The townhouse is secure. My most trusted people swept it an hour ago." Lila nodded, not trusting her voice. The car turned down a tree-lined street where elegant brownstones stood shoulder to shoulder, their windows dark and peaceful. They pulled into a hidden garage beneath one of the buildings, and Dominic's hand found her lower back as he guided her through a series of secure doors. The townhouse was a perfect blend of luxury and fortification, reinforced windows, heavy doors with multiple locks, and state-of-the-art security systems surrounded classic architecture and expensive furnishings. Dominic led her through each room methodically, his voice low and intent. Kitchen and living room on the main floor, panic room behind the bookcase, press here and it opens. He demonstrated the mechanism. Upper floor has bedrooms. If something happens, get to either the panic room or the master suite. Both are fortified. As morning light began filtering through bulletproof glass, Lila watched Dominic position guards and check security feeds. The cold efficiency she'd first seen in him had softened somehow, transformed into something more personal. He wasn't just protecting an asset anymore. His attention felt deeper, almost possessive. "You should try to rest," he said, noting her exhaustion. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right. I'll be in the study, going through intelligence reports." But sleep proved impossible. After tossing in the luxurious bed for an hour, Lila made her way downstairs. She found Dominic surrounded by papers and laptop screens, his jacket discarded and sleeves rolled up. In the natural light, she noticed things she hadn't before. Old scars crossing his knuckles, the shadows of sleeplessness under his eyes, the tension held in his broad shoulders. "Any news about Mr. Sal? About Salvatore?" she asked, hovering in the doorway. Dominic looked up, running a hand through his dark hair. "He's alive. We confirmed that much through our channels. Whoever took him wants something specific, but they're being careful about demands." His jaw tightened. "The attack last night. It was too well coordinated. Someone inside the family is feeding information to our enemies." Lila sank into a leather chair, processing this. "That's why we had to move again. Because someone might have known about the penthouse." "Yes." He studied her face. "You're handling this better than most civilians would." "I'm not sure I'm handling it at all," she admitted. "Everything feels surreal." Yesterday I was just a waitress who helped an old man cross the street. Now I'm caught in the middle of," she gestured vaguely, "all this." Something softened in Dominic's expression. "You're under my protection now, whatever happens." The day passed in a strange kind of limbo. Dominic worked tirelessly, making calls and analyzing reports, while Lila drifted between rooms, trying to adjust to her new reality. She noticed how he always positioned himself between her and any potential threat, how his eyes tracked her movements even while discussing business. The lethal man from the penthouse was still there, but layered now with something else, an almost tender vigilance. As evening approached, Dominic's security team delivered takeout from an approved restaurant. Lila found herself helping him reheat portions in the kitchen, the domestic task feeling oddly intimate after everything that had happened. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair. "You need to eat." They shared the meal in comfortable silence until Dominic spoke unexpectedly. "I was 17 when my brother died." His voice was quiet, weighted with memory. "Street racing accident. Stupid thing to die for. Our parents were already gone. Mother to cancer, father to drink. I was angry, reckless, headed for self-destruction." Lila held perfectly still, afraid any movement might stop him from continuing. "Salvatore found me trying to burn down a rival's warehouse." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Instead of having me killed, he saw something worth saving, took me in, gave me purpose, shaped all that rage into something useful." His fingers traced old scars on his knuckles. "He became more of a father than my own ever was. That's why finding him matters so much," Lila whispered. "He's your real family." Dominic's dark eyes met hers. "Yes, and someone is using you to get to him, to get to me. They knew targeting you would force my hand." The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, more intimate in the dim evening light. Lila stared down at her half-eaten food. "I never meant to be a burden. If I had known who he really was—" "You're not," Dominic cut her off firmly. "You're not a burden, Lila." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. The gentle whir of the security cameras provided a quiet backdrop to their breathing, and Lila found herself studying his profile. The strong line of his jaw, the subtle softness around his mouth that appeared only when he spoke to her. The violence she'd witnessed was still part of him, but now she understood it better. Everything he did, every life he took, was in service of protecting what was his. And somehow, without meaning to, she had become something he considered worth protecting. They sat there in the dimly lit kitchen, the remains of their meal between them, neither speaking, but both acutely aware of how their worlds had irreversibly collided. Outside, the city continued its nighttime rhythm, unaware of the complex web of loyalty, danger, and emerging feelings developing behind the townhouse's fortified walls. Dominic's phone lay silent on the table, his weapons within easy reach. But for this moment at least, the threats felt distant. It was just them, sharing space and unspoken understanding in the gathering darkness, while somewhere in the city, Salvatore's fate hung in the balance, and unknown enemies plotted their next move. The security team moved quietly through their rounds, their footsteps a reassuring reminder of the protection surrounding them. Lila watched Dominic's hands, those lethal instruments that had dealt death so efficiently, now gentle as they pushed a glass of water toward her. The contradictions in him fascinated her, the ruthless enforcer and the man who shared painful memories over reheated takeout, the calculated violence and the unexpected tenderness. The morning light crept through bulletproof windows, casting long shadows across the townhouse's dining room. Lila padded down the stairs in borrowed clothes, following the scent of fresh coffee and the soft rustle of papers. She found Dominic already at work, his broad shoulders bent over the dining table, now covered in maps and encrypted messages. His jacket was draped over a chair, leaving him in a black shirt that showed the muscle beneath. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd barely slept. Papers were arranged in precise stacks around him, each weighted down with weapons that doubled as paperweights, a stark reminder of their reality. "Good morning," she ventured softly. Dominic looked up, his expression guarded but lacking yesterday's hostility. "Sleep okay?" "As well as anyone could, given the circumstances." Lila gestured to the coffee maker. "Would you like some?" He nodded, returning to his work while she moved through the kitchen. The domestic normalcy of measuring coffee grounds felt surreal against the backdrop of surveillance photos and coded messages. She brought him a steaming mug, setting it carefully away from the papers. "Thank you." His voice was rough from lack of sleep. "I've been reviewing Salvatore's movements, trying to find where the ambush happened. You spent more time with him than anyone recently. Did he ever mention meeting places, favorite spots? Lila settled into the chair beside him, studying the map. He liked the park bench near St. Michael's Church, said the pigeons were good company. She pointed to the location. And there was a small Italian cafe he'd mention. Bella's, I think. He said it reminded him of home. Dominic's pen moved across the map, marking locations. What else? Any details about his routine, even small ones? He always avoided the main streets during rush hour, she recalled. Said the noise bothered him. We'd take the quieter routes, especially that alley behind the flower shop. She broke off, remembering the spot where the masked men had grabbed her. Dominic's hand twitched as if to reach for her, then returned to his notes. The side streets would have made him vulnerable. Perfect for an ambush. His jaw tightened. Keep going. Everything matters. They spent the next hour like this, Lila offering fragments of memory while Dominic pieced them into a larger puzzle. She found herself studying his method, the way he cross-referenced times and locations, how his fingers traced potential escape routes. Despite his dangerous exterior, his mind worked with precise, analytical grace. There's more footage we need to review, he said finally, standing. The surveillance office is beneath us. We'll need to move carefully. The townhouse is secure, but I'm not taking chances. He led her to what appeared to be a maintenance door, revealing a stairwell. 2 guards fell into position behind them as they descended. The surveillance room was a stark contrast to the townhouse above, all steel and screens humming with technology. Operators worked silently at various stations, nodding respectfully as Dominic entered. Pull up the night of Salvatore's disappearance, he ordered, all cameras along his usual route. The footage appeared on multiple screens, grainy but clear enough to show Lila and the disguised Salvatore walking together. She watched herself on screen, completely unaware of the danger surrounding them. There she was, smiling and chatting with a man she thought was just a kindly elder, while hidden figures tracked their movements from the shadows. Her hands began to shake. Dominic noticed immediately, stepping closer until his chest nearly touched her back. His hand found the small of her spine, warm and steady through her shirt. The touch was brief but grounding, pulling her back from the edge of panic. Look there, he murmured, pointing to a shadow moving between frames. Someone was following you both. Professional, military training in their movement. Lila leaned forward, forcing herself to focus on the details rather than her fear. He seemed more tired that night, slower than usual. I should have noticed something was wrong. You couldn't have known. Dominic's voice was surprisingly gentle. Salvatore spent decades perfecting his disguise. The frailty, the confusion, it was all carefully crafted to make people underestimate him. They spent another hour analyzing the footage, Dominic occasionally conferring with his security team in rapid Italian. As dusk approached, his phone buzzed with a message that made his expression darken. I need to handle something, he said, checking his weapons. Stay inside. Marco and Elena will be here soon to keep you company. He paused at the door. I mean it, Lila. Don't leave the townhouse. She nodded, watching him disappear into the gathering darkness. The hours crawled by, filled with anxious pacing and attempted small talk with Marco and Elena. Finally, well past midnight, the security system chimed to announce Dominic's return. He entered looking exhausted, but triumphant, despite the fresh bruising along his jaw and split knuckles. Lila fought the urge to reach for him, to check his injuries. Instead, she waited as he secured his weapons and ran a hand through his disheveled hair. The informant talked, he said, voice rough. Salvatore's disappearance was orchestrated by someone inside our organization. Someone high-ranking enough to know his routines, his disguise, everything. His eyes met hers, dark with lethal promise. I'm going to end whoever set this up. They stood in the doorway of her guest room, the air heavy between them. Lila could smell gunpowder and leather on him, could see the barely contained violence in his stance. Yet his presence made her feel safer rather than afraid. I believe you, she whispered. And she did. There was no doubt in her mind that Dominic would tear apart heaven and hell to protect what was his. He held her gaze for a long moment before stepping back, allowing her to close the door. Lila leaned against it, heart racing, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. The man who had terrified her just days ago had become her shield, her protector, and somehow that felt right. Through the door, she could hear him giving quiet orders to the night security team. His voice was controlled again, all business, but she remembered how it had softened when he spoke to her. She remembered his hand on her back in the surveillance room, steadying her without words. Lila moved to the window, careful to stay away from direct sight lines as Dominic had taught her. The city sparkled beyond the bulletproof glass, oblivious to the war brewing in its shadows. Somewhere out there, Salvatore was hidden away, trusting his adopted son to set things right. Somewhere, a traitor was moving pieces on a board, not knowing they had already been marked for destruction. She thought of Dominic's promise, "I'm going to end whoever set this up," and shivered. Not from fear, but from the certainty that she was witnessing the beginning of something both terrible and necessary. A reckoning that would reshape the underworld of their city. Her small bedroom felt like an island of calm in a storm of violence and betrayal. Yet even here she could feel the pull of Dominic's presence, the weight of his protection, the complexity of what was building between them. She had stumbled into his world by accident, but now she was irrevocably part of it, bound to him by circumstance and something deeper neither of them was ready to name. Morning light crept through the townhouse windows, but Dominic quickly pulled the heavy curtains closed. "No direct sunlight," he ordered, his voice tense. "Stay away from the windows, don't answer the phone, I don't care who it shows on caller ID." Lila wrapped her arms around herself, watching him pace. "You think the traitor knows where I am? They'd be stupid not to." He checked his phone for the 100th time. "This townhouse is one of our secure locations. Anyone high-ranking enough to betray Salvatore would know about it." "Then let me help," Lila insisted. "I can't just sit here waiting to be killed." Dominic studied her for a long moment before nodding. They spent the next several hours at the dining table, surrounded by files and photographs of Salvatore's inner circle. Lila's fingers traced faces and names until they blurred together. "Salvatore never truly trusted anyone," Dominic explained, his voice soft with old pain. "Except for maybe 5 people in his entire empire." He glanced at her. And then, inexplicably, "You." "I didn't do anything special," Lila protested. "You showed genuine kindness without wanting anything in return. In our world, that's rare enough to be precious." They worked through lunch, piecing together a pattern that became increasingly clear. The rival syndicate's attacks were too precise, too well-timed. They had inside information that could only come from one source. "The consigliere," Dominic growled, just as his phone buzzed with confirmation. Surveillance footage showing the trusted advisor meeting with known rivals 3 days before Salvatore's disappearance. Dominic's rage exploded without warning. He hurled his glass against the wall, the sharp crack making Lila jump. Crystal shards scattered across the floor like deadly diamonds. "I'm sorry," he said immediately, his voice rough. "I shouldn't have—" He broke off, running both hands through his hair. "He was like an uncle to me, taught me strategy, politics, everything a future boss needed to know. And all this time—" Lila approached him carefully, stepping around the broken glass. "You couldn't have known." His vulnerability in that moment was startling. A crack in his armor that showed the man beneath the violence. The intensity between them grew throughout the day, charged glances and accidental touches building into something neither could ignore. That night, sleep eluded Lila. She tossed and turned until finally giving up, padding barefoot to the kitchen for water. She found Dominic already there, staring into a cup of cold coffee. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. He looked up, shadows under his eyes. "There's too much at stake." Lila sat across from him, drawn into his orbit like gravity. "We'll find him. Salvatore." "We." Dominic's mouth curved slightly. "A week ago, you didn't even know who he really was. Now you're in the middle of a war, and still you stay strong." His voice lowered. "It draws me to you, your strength, your light, even in all this darkness." The air between them crackled with possibility. Lila's heart thundered in her chest as Dominic leaned forward, his hand reaching for hers across the table. The gunshots shattered the moment like glass. Dominic moved with lethal grace, yanking Lila to her feet. "Basement! Now!" His gun appeared in his hand as he rushed her through the house, downstairs, through a hidden door to a steel-reinforced safe room. "Stay here," he ordered, punching in a security code. "Don't open this door for anyone but me." "Dominic, I'll come back for you, I promise." His eyes held hers for one burning second before he slammed the door. Lila pressed her ear against the cold steel, heart racing, as she listened to Dominic's muffled voice shouting orders above. "Cover! The south entrance! Take them down! No survivors!" More gunshots rang out closer now. Lila closed her eyes, praying that Dominic would keep his promise to return. In the darkness of the safe room, all she could do was wait and listen to the sound of violence echoing through the walls. The gunfire died away in stages, first the sharp cracks of close combat, then the distant echoes, finally leaving only a ringing silence. Lila's muscles ached from tension as she huddled in the corner of the safe room, counting her breaths in the darkness. When the heavy door finally opened, she squinted against the sudden light. Dominic stood in the doorway, his black shirt dusted with soot and debris. His expression was grim, but his eyes softened when they met hers. "It's clear. Are you all right?" Lila nodded, her throat tight. "What happened?" It was a diversion. He helped her up, his touch gentle despite the gun still in his other hand. "They wanted to confirm our location. We need to move. Now." Within the hour, they were speeding through empty streets in an armored SUV, flanked by 2 escort vehicles. Lila watched the city blur past, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Dominic sat beside her, coordinating with his men through encrypted messages, his presence both reassuring and electric. The warehouse appeared abandoned from the outside, a hulking shadow against the night sky. But inside, Lila found it transformed into a makeshift command center. Computers hummed on folding tables, armed guards patrolled the catwalks above, and maps covered the walls with red pins marking territory lines. "Salvatore's alive," Dominic told her as they settled into a quiet corner. "But they're moving him frequently, making it impossible to pin down his location." His jaw tightened. "The traitor sent terms. They want to trade you for the king." The weight of those words crashed over Lila. She sank onto a metal chair, guilt churning in her stomach. "This is all because of me. If I hadn't been helping him cross the street." "Stop!" Dominic crouched in front of her, his hands gripping the chair arms. "You showed kindness to a man everyone else ignored. That's not wrong." But the helplessness persisted, spreading through her chest like poison. She was just a waitress, caught in a war between titans. What good could she possibly do? Dominic seemed to sense her spiral. He didn't offer empty reassurances or false comfort. Instead, he stayed close, his powerful presence anchoring her as the night wore on. When exhaustion finally overtook them, they retreated to the warehouse's only furnished room, a sparse space with a military cot and a single chair. "Sleep," Dominic ordered, settling into the chair with his gun across his lap. "I'll keep watch." Lila curled onto the cot, too tired to argue. The thin blanket did little against the warehouse chill, but Dominic's protective vigil made her feel oddly safe. She drifted off to the sound of his steady breathing. Dawn crept in through high windows, painting steel beams in pale gold. Lila woke to find Dominic still alert, though the shadows under his eyes had deepened. His phone buzzed, and he stepped outside to take the call, speaking in low, urgent tones. The warehouse felt suffocating after so many hours inside. Lila's skin itched for fresh air, just a moment of normalcy in this surreal nightmare her life had become. She glanced at the back door, barely 20 feet away. Surely just a few minutes wouldn't hurt. Before she could second-guess herself, she slipped through the heavy door into the loading bay. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. Lila closed her eyes, taking her first deep breath in what felt like days. The van's engine roared to life without warning. She barely had time to turn before rough hands seized her arms. A chemical-soaked cloth pressed against her face, muffling her scream. The world tilted sideways, colors bleeding together like watercolors in the rain. Her last conscious thought was of Dominic, of the rage and fear that would consume him when he found her gone. Then darkness swallowed her whole, and she knew nothing more. Consciousness returned slowly, like wading through thick fog. Lila blinked, finding herself bound to a chair in a damp basement. A figure emerged from the shadows, the consigliere, his elegant suit incongruous with their grim surroundings. "Finally awake," he said softly, circling her chair. "Poor little Lila, caught in our web." His practiced calm sent chills down her spine. "Salvatore grew weak, you see, choosing Dominic over me, his most loyal advisor. Then you appeared. His civilian weakness?" Above ground, Dominic discovered her absence within minutes. "Find her!" he roared, storming through the warehouse. "Every camera, every street corner." His men scrambled to comply as rage consumed him. Hours crawled by. Lila fought waves of dizziness as the consigliere detailed how her death would destroy Dominic. Meanwhile, Dominic extracted information from a captured soldier, learning her location. He assembled a strike team, determination burning in his eyes. They breached the building efficiently, gunfire echoing through corridors. The consigliere raised his weapon to Lila's head just as Dominic burst in. 2 shots rang out. Only one found its mark. The black sedan cut through the night, Dominic's grip on Lila's hand unwavering. Even when she whispered she was safe, his fingers only tightened. His other hand stayed on the wheel, eyes scanning for threats as they approached the fortified Moretti compound. Inside the medical wing, they found Salvatore, tired but alive, saved by loyal soldiers. His eyes brightened seeing Layla. "My dear girl," he said softly, "I never meant for this darkness to touch you. Your kindness, it was real in a world of lies." Dominic kept his hand pressed to Lila's back, no longer hiding his protective stance. Over 24 hours, he systematically eliminated the Consigliere's remaining network while Lila recovered in a guarded suite. That night, Dominic came to her room, his usual control cracking. "I thought I'd lost you," he admitted, voice rough. "You've become everything to me." When he finally kissed her, it was slow and deep. A culmination of fear transformed into desperate tenderness. Sunlight filtered through the penthouse windows as Lila stirred in Dominic's strong arms. His warmth surrounded her, making the world feel safe, despite the compound's quiet activity beyond the door. When they finally emerged together, Salvatore waited in his study, determination etched on his weathered face. "It's time," Salvatore announced, officially naming Dominic as the new head of the Moretti family. His voice carried the weight of decades of leadership. "Lead with wisdom, my son." Dominic stood tall, his hand finding Lila's. "I'll rebuild this empire stronger," he declared, "with transparency, loyalty, and trust." His grip tightened on Lila's fingers, their futures now irrevocably intertwined. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.